everyone, Kate here to do my first 2020 TBR stack update video. And at the very beginning of the year, I just grabbed a big old stack of books from my shelves that I was interested in reading this year. And I am doing it like Leanne from Literary Diversions does her stack at TBRs, where I have to read them in order. And if I start to dislike a book, my two options are either to DNF it or finish it. I can't just leave it there lingering on my currently reading. And, we know that's something that I do. I just accumulate so many books in my currently reading pile. So unfortunately, it was a very discouraging beginning of my stack. I have the first 6 here, and I only ended up completing 1 of them. So the very first book did not kick things off great, and that was Mrs. Mike. And I actually ended up giving this to a friend who I thought maybe would be able to like it. So I have trouble even knowing how I want to convey what my issues were with this book were. So this is a historical fiction, and it is about the lives of this couple when they meet in I think it's Ontario, and it's early 1900s. And then she lives, I think, in Boston first. But for her health, she moves to Ontario with her uncle and then meets and falls in love with this Mountie. And he does not live where her uncle lives. He lives way far out in a very rural community. And so when she marries him, she's going to be moving to an even more rural location. But there were several things about this book that I just really had a lot of trouble with. I really liked the writing style. I found that very approachable, and I was wanting this to be another Christie by Catherine Marshall, which is about a young woman who is a teacher and goes to teach in the Appalachian Mountains. And I really wanted that. And this was not it. Firstly, the relationship that she has with her husband, I really didn't like. It was very much he was so mature and knew so much and was so knowledgeable, and she was just this child and he was having to raise her. And having that dynamic in a marriage, I just think is really weird, and it made me really uncomfortable. At one point, there are wolves howling outside. This is when they're on their way to where they're going to live as a married couple. And she starts screaming because she's scared, and he yells at her in front of everyone to shut up. He yells at her in front of a whole group of people. And then the right thing for her to do is just to stop screaming and just act like it was totally fine that he screamed at her in front of everyone, instead of holding her and saying it's going to be okay, but she's this. Just the dynamic was he did everything right and she was just so foolish and naive, and he was really going to finish raising her. It was just weird. But the other thing about it that was really hard for me is that the First Nations people in the book, it's such a fine line with historical fiction, right? Because you don't want to write prejudices out of a book. You don't want to act like they never existed in historical settings. But you also don't want it to come across too offensive and as, dated. So it's a really fine line. But what I really like when you're reading a historical fiction is if it's treated with nuance. And so I have a very kind of specific formula that I like in historical fiction. And I really like when kind of the main character, even if they have these misconceptions, maybe about a culture different than theirs, they learn through the course of the book, something like that. But she is really, when she moves to this community and sees kind of what the local community, the way that they live and their views on hygiene and on food and everything, she's really appalled. And the sentence that made me decide, all right, I just can't get on board. It was already kind of this really patronizing type attitude towards them. And I guess I like for the protagonist of the story to, not be that way, or to realize that they are, and to realize that there's something you can learn from everyone kind of thing. Maybe there's some things I don't agree with, but wow, they do this way. Or like in Dr. Quinn, she always loves the Cheyenne's medicine that they teach her how to use. but there may be certain things with marriage in Cheyenne tribes that she disagrees with. But anyhow, so she's narrating in her head, thinking about like just how terribly they do everything in life. And then she says, you know, but they couldn't help it because they were savages. And so at that point with that sentence, I was like, you know what? It's just not the book for me. I was cringing too much while I was reading it. And I know that there are people that can kind of take it for what it is. It is the time period. And I'm not saying at all, I think it's wrong for people to love that book. But just for me, it just didn't settle right. So it was the combination of the really like patriarchal marriage dynamic and then this really just superior attitude. And I think because it was written in the 50s, maybe not even realizing that they had given their main character a superior attitude, it just didn't settle with me right. And I was like, why am I fighting this? So unfortunately, I had really high hopes for that one and it did not live up to it. But then the next one, and I think that first book gave me, I did a disservice to the second book then, because I was kind of in like I'm really annoyed at that book, and that I'm annoyed at how excited I was and what my expectations were and how they were not matched up. But the next one was Here Are Lovers by Hilda Vaughan. And my complaint with this book is not one that I usually have about older classics, and that is the dialect. In the first chapter, it was so rough. And the first chapter was pretty long. It was 23 pages. So that's, you know, that was a decent chunk. And I was just so confused about what was going on. And yeah, just had, I don't know. It was just something about it was just really hard going. And so I was like, you know what, just forget it. I'm not going to push it. But this is one I'm definitely going to keep, because I think it was just, I didn't go into it with the right mindset, but I want to keep moving through my stack. So I'm going to keep this. I will be keeping it, and I'll come back to it another time, because I do feel like it has the potential and I just wasn't in the right headspace for it. So that is not the book's fault. All right. Then the next one is And the Ladies of the Club by Helen Hoover Santmeyer. So this is unfortunately another case of, you know, I'm not sure how well this book has aged. It's written in the 80s. Let me double check. 1984 is when this was published, and it's set in Ohio at the turn of the century, right after the Civil War, and you're seeing the different women in this small community being part of this club. And this was a case of where there are characters that are clearly prejudiced, but the author like using racial slurs to refer to people of color in it, and the author wasn't making it clear that they were not okay with that. So I started this with Bree Hill, and we both, like, after about a chapter, we both just tapped out and we're like, nope, I'm out. And so the main characters are kind of like bandying about these racial slurs, like just really casual about it. And it's not like you don't have other characters in it going up against them and saying, you know, why would you say that? Why do you have these ideas, and, you know, wanting to grow as characters? It seems like the prejudice is just going to be kind of this stagnant thing. The racism in this is going to be a stagnant thing, and it's not going to be addressed. Like, it's not thought of as something that's worth being part of the plot. And also the fact that it's also very long. So I was thinking, like, I don't want to read a 1,400 page book if there are characters that I can't love. So it's not, like I'm saying, I just want it to be dealt with nuance. Not that people can't have, you know, I don't know, hurtful views and also have great strengths about them and do good things. But it was also the fact that then there are, you know, Black characters in this book who are the slaves, and they aren't going to be main characters ever. You just see them in the background. And so it just was kind of like all of these really, I don't know, something about the tone of the book was just really off-putting to me. And it just kind of like I was cringing, and I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? If I'm going to cringe, why should I keep on reading it? So I said goodbye to And the Ladies of the Club, and I think I'll just be getting rid of this. If for some reason I ever wanted to try it again, I think I might just get the ebook, because this is so heavy. Okay, another one I was very sad that I did not like, and that was And the Fountain Overflows by Rebecca West. This was a buddy read with Kate from the novel Nomad, and I made it 172 pages in this, so I really tried. And it's just, I was not intrigued by this book at all. It was a bunch of characters with nothing of value, as Sarah from Hardcover Hearts said about a book that we read together. And I just didn't care about them. 172 pages in. And Kate, she, from the novel Nomad, who was also reading it with me, she said that she was finding it a much slower read than the other Rebecca West book that she read, which was The Return of the Soldier. So that makes me think, oh, maybe I should try a different Rebecca West, because there were parts of the writing that I liked, but it just felt very meandering. You know, my 3 requirements for a 5-star read are beautiful writing, interesting, nuanced characters, and an interesting plot. And this didn't really have much of a plot. I didn't really find the characters interesting, and the writing didn't really shine in this. So I think maybe The Return of the Soldier would be a good first Rebecca West book to try. Then the only book that I completed in this stack, and I probably would not have completed it if I had not done a buddy read of it with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. Bless her. So this is Love in a Cold Climate. And Sarah was like the best thing about this buddy read. Sarah is so cool. She is, she just has such warmth to her, and she had such insightful things to say about the book, and really was just such a thoughtful person to buddy read with. So this is definitely not the last book that we read together. So I think we both agreed after we had read it, after we finished it, I gave this 3 stars. I'm not sure how many Sarah gave it, but then Sarah listened to a couple podcasts about it, and some of the comments that it said really made me rethink what I thought of this book, and thinking I just had the wrong expectation about it, for one. Because it felt very different. This is the sequel to The Pursuit of Love. This felt very different from The Pursuit of Love. It had, The Pursuit of Love has a sharpness to it, but it has some sweetness to go with that. Whereas this just had a lot of the sharpness to it. And there's a lot of, like I said, Sarah said, you know, characters with nothing of value. And I think that Nancy Mitford was writing from experience, and especially on some particular issues that are spoilers, so I don't want to say more. So I think that I didn't really understand what Nancy Mitford was trying to do with this book going into it. That being said, though, it had her writing, and that was what kept me going. That was what gave it 3 stars, but I wasn't really interested in any of the characters, and the plot felt incredibly meandering. And also it was just a big come down from me after The Pursuit of Love. And so I guess I think it's a little bit, it took me aback that it's part of a series, because some of the characters from the first one are mentioned, but the vibe is incredibly different. And I think she was doing something very different with this one. But I'm so glad that I buddy read it with Sarah, because I got so much more out of it than I ever would have otherwise. So yes, the only one in the stack that I completed. And then yesterday, the last one in the stack, and the one that I decided to DNF, and that is Chesapeake by James Michener. And I am devastated that I did not enjoy this, because I've wanted to read James Michener for a decade. Not exaggerating. I've wanted to read him for a decade. And I love this big floppy paperback I have of it, but this is a plot-based novel right here. And, you know, I read a good plot-based novel here and there. I loved A Sorcery of Thorns. That was a YA book that I read in the summer, but it was very plot-based, but that was around 400 pages, and I think that's like a great length for a plot-based novel. This, however, friends, is 996 pages. And I got through part 1 and I thought, you know what? I am not at all interested in continuing this book. And I'm going to, when the library is open again, donate this to the library bookstore, this beautiful copy, bring it right back where I bought it from, and it will go into the hands of someone else who can enjoy it. If you like plot-based plot-based books, you might like this, but also his writing was just so plain. It was so plain and like, yeah. So, onwards and upwards, right? I really, like, I had this totally stupid self-inflicted guilt over not loving the first 6 in my stack. I'm like, what does that say about my reading year? And then I looked at the next 6 in my stack once I was like partway through that. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually really excited to get to those. So we're just going to say we had a rough start. We're in April, and a lot of these books look really great for springtime, even though they're still part of the wintertime stack. And I will show them to you briefly. So Sarah mentioned to me that she has ordered the Mapp and Lucia books. And I got really excited because the next on my stack is the 3rd and 4th books in the series, Lucia in London and Mapp and Lucia. And she wants to read the first 2 before we buddy read these. This is how much I love buddy reading with her, is I'm willing to move this down in my stack. Look at that. It was right on the top. Sarah, that's how much I loved buddy reading with you. I was very excited to get to this, so hopefully we'll get to it sooner rather than later. So the next one in the stack, I had several chunkers in that first part, is Mrs. Arris Goes to New York by Paul Gallico. The Mrs. Arris Goes to Paris was just like the sweetest little book, and this is less than 200 pages. This is just something I feel like in a weekend I could read it, and it would just be a lot of fun. Then More of a Wild Card, Showboat by Edna Ferber. I don't know what I'm going to think about this. It's about this showboat on the Mississippi in the early 1900s, and Magnolia Hawks. She spends her childhood aboard the Cotton Blossom. So we'll see. I do love a good Southern novel. Then Joy in the Morning by Betty Smith. I loved A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Then it's been way too long since I've read a Willa Cather, and this is the only in the Great Plains trilogy I haven't read, The Song of the Lark. We shall see what I think of it. And then lastly, one that a read of is long overdue is Peace Like a River by Leif Enger. And that is my next stack. So I'll be back. I'm hoping to be back sooner this time, that it won't take me 4 months to do an update video. But that was my very anticlimactic start with my 2020 TBR stack. So thank you for watching, and I will be back for another video soon. Bye.